country should be. United we stand in America, hand in hand in America. Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
Good morning, everyone out there. Welcome to Changing Times. It is Wednesday, November the 20th. I think we're about a week away from Thanksgiving.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
a week from today, I'll be making my turkey.
I love turkey, mashed potatoes and gravy, green bean casserole, all that stuff.
I slow roast it in the oven overnight. That's why I say I start on Wednesday.
A person diabetic like me still eats pie and things like that. So, no, it's great. So I'm Lynn Morris, and you are?
Dr. Mary Byrne.
I tell you what, and you're a great co-host. And we have behind the screens, you all can't see this person, but he's Dennis, and he is the man who makes this show go. So he's our producer. And I want to brag about Acts Ministry because he just waved at you, so I saw him wave. And I want to brag about Acts Ministry because it is a worldwide, non-denominational ministry that believes in God, Son, and Holy Spirit, and they're all volunteers. Dennis is a volunteer. Mary and I drive up here, and we volunteer our time for different things for Acts Ministry. Jim Whining and his wife, Pam, they're over there in Lee Summit probably today, or no telling, Dennis, they may be anywhere. they're everywhere doing great things for the Lord and for people. And he's not paid either, so we're all paid the same.
Yeah, that's right. Equality, right?
Right. So we don't have to worry about that. But today I'm going to do something different. Mary and I were talking yesterday, and I've had a struggle. It's been a struggle for my wife and I, losing my foot and my leg. She is a tremendous Uber driver. My schedule is such that I don't just go to the courthouse and stay there 8 hours. I go several places a day because I have different board meetings and different functions throughout the entire county as presiding commissioner. And so she has to come back and forth several times a day, and she's hurt her back probably 3 or 4 times. So she was suffering from back trouble last week, and it's just a sad thing for me sitting in the car after I've been helped to get into the car, and then I hear her moan and groan while she's trying to get the wheelchair in and out of the car. And it makes me feel pretty bad that I should be the one that should be carrying that wheelchair in and out of that car. But no, I can't do it right now. But I'm doing better with my leg, and so I'm up to about 4 hours a day on my leg. And I've been practicing steps, Mary. Because,
I'm waiting for the day when I see you walking.
Well, it'll be in December.
Okay.
I think it's going to be in December. I'm hoping to drive by December or sometime in December. We won't say what day. It's just going to be in December. And we'll be driving. I'll be driving by myself again. That way I don't have to be dependent on somebody else's schedule. Because she's got a very busy schedule herself, and so this is going to be a blessing, but we're going to make it through that. But we had talked about doing something a little different today. We have a lot of great difference makers that we always have on our show for 4.5 years now. We've had difference makers. Everybody's a difference
Amazing
maker.
people we get to meet.
Oh man, I tell you, that's why when you're watching our show, you're going to meet all kinds of different people, and hopefully, whatever state you live in, it doesn't really matter. You can do the great things that these people are doing. We've got some great guests lined up for December and on this next year. I'm excited about 2025 for lots of reasons, and we'll get into those at some point, sometime. But today I wanted to do something a little different. I realized that when I started this show 4.5 years ago, I had a different co-host, Don Blackard, and Don was a great young lady, just had a birthday last week, and very smart, very creative, and finally learned, was educated to do her job that she wanted to do.
And a veteran. That was a big part of her.
She's a veteran, yeah. I want to brag about that real quick because we had a really great dedication the other day at the Springfield Veterans Cemetery at Lake Springfield. I'm on that board, And I was watching that dedication. It was interesting. We got a monument that's over 100 years old. It was dedicated to us. It was given to us from another part of Springfield that was starting to have some damage done to it, and that's unfortunate. So we took it, and it was about World War I, and we had, I think it was 39 Springfieldians in that World War I. They're all named on this big monument. It was really kind of cool. But Don Blackard, after 9/11, the day after 9/11, she was in college, and she joined the National Guard. And just a few months after she joined the National Guard, who had never been called up to active duty. This was the Engineers Division in Springfield. They got called up to active duty. So she spent a couple of years in Iraq, and then came home, finished up the rest of her service and things like that. But anyway, so she works in a hospital now and does fancy X-rays. So I don't even know the names of these big, long terminology names for the X-rays she does on the heart, but she does that. But anyway, so she and I have talked over time about who she is and who I am. It doesn't really matter who I am today. So we're going to figure out who you are, Dr. Mary Byrne. So, you and I have known each other a long time.
Well, yeah, when you were at the state capitals,
Yeah.
when we met, you were doing a radio show with Representative Jeff Messenger.
Yeah, that's right.
And you graciously invited me to come and explain what was going on in Missouri education while you had that show, and then you moved over to here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that was a really good move. I mean, I enjoyed that talk show because we had people calling in. That's the thing I would love to have here, and I've told Jim Whining this. Someday we're going to have enough donors that we can actually get a phone system and we can pay for the cause, because I would love to understand what people are thinking all over this country and around the world. It would be great. We always average between 6 and 10 calls a week. That's pretty good for a 1-hour talk show.
Yeah, I think, though, I appreciate the freedom we have
Yeah.
here to discuss the topics that we think our listeners need to hear about. And I felt it was more filtered in the commercial radio industry. So...
Well, it was true. That's probably true. And then, of course, for us, for Jeff and I, we bought our own hour. So you pay for your own time, and you pay for whatever they say you're going to pay. And then when we got new owners, then it just kind of seemed like they put more ads in my own talk show. So I had my sponsors, and so I had to take care of my sponsors and promote them. And then I had other ads. Pretty soon we didn't have very much time for talk.
Yes.
And so I decided to come over here and do this show. And maybe not be quite so political, but sometimes you have to be political.
Well, I think our discussion over the last year is how government is one of the institutions God gave us in the book of Exodus. It was the Hebrew Republic. And there's actually a design for how to go about governance. But let's just say that there have been influences to silence the Christian voice in government. And Christians began to believe it, that they didn't have a role. And I think that is what God is doing and moving right now and saying, look how bad it gets when you sit this out. It's not that separation of church and state was never meant to silence the church. It was meant to silence the government's interference in the church. But they have successfully twisted what Jefferson said in his letter to the Baptists, and actually separation of church and state does not appear in our founding documents. Okay, it was in a letter, a personal letter written by Jefferson, so it is not an official policy. It's simply a cultural phenomenon when there's a group of people who don't believe in God and want him out of our lives. When they control the government, then the people groan. But when good men are in, and women are in government, then the people can celebrate. I mean, that's scriptural. So, yeah, that's part of, I think, the freedom that I appreciate being on this show.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I agree with all that. So let's talk about Christians a minute. So we just had an election, and I think we had probably more Christians, maybe by number this time, that voted than maybe previously. But we still have a lot of Christians. They say they're Christians, and there's all different degrees of
Christian
being
in name
Christian.
only?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kind, and we can't question any of those
No.
people. It's not for me to judge.
Only God knows the heart.
Yeah, so I don't judge anybody. But I just wonder. I'm proud of one thing. I'm proud of the different ministers I know. The church I go to, several ministers. They could be smaller churches, like out in the country in Christian County, way out there in the country. They have maybe 100, 150 people that come to church, maybe only 30 or 40 or 50, different sized churches. But those ministers were preaching about voting the Bible, paying attention to what
right.
God says and believes in and what we should believe in. And so they were actually trying to educate. I don't want to say persuade, because there at any church, at any gathering, you've got people believe one thing or the other, and it's okay. But I was proud that they took the time and they stood out, because some ministers don't do that at all. They don't take any risk whatsoever. They don't want to run off any of their church members. They don't want to take a stand.
It's the role of the shepherd to feed their flock. And they need to feed the flock information from the scripture that instructs them about God's vision for his people. And if they just let any opinion overrule what God is saying in his scripture, they're not doing their job. Because that's not feeding the flock. And that's what Jesus said. Man doesn't live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from God. And so feeding your flock is feeding your flock the word. And that word should permeate every aspect of your lives. You cannot silo your life if you're committed to God. And that was the whole point. I've studied the pamphlets that were originally the sermons of the pastors from New England during the period of the American Revolution and prior to that, because it was actually the pastors describing to people the message of liberty that was in the Bible, saying, but we don't have that. And the reason we don't have that is because we have a ruler that wants to be God. And so there were always limitations put on the amount of civil unrest, like in the Boston Tea Party. They overthrew the product, but didn't destroy anything on the ship.
Right.
And so the whole point was to overthrow the tyranny, but you don't create damage to the private owners of that boat, which is very different from the violence we're seeing now, for example, in Ferguson. Right. Where they destroy personal property and make the people miserable. It was, and the I think it was the Battle of Bunker Hill. The instructions were, don't fire the first shot. You wait until you're shot upon. Right. I mean, and that takes discipline and self-regulation that is not part of the violence and rioting you see now from leftists who want to create chaos and anxiety and get people to submit by giving up. That was not the point back then. So these pastors were saying, God has a plan for liberty, so that we can worship him in freedom, so we can serve him in freedom. That's exactly what the Hebrew public was set up for. That's exactly what Moses was trying to tell Pharaoh. Let my people go that they may serve me. It was never about licentiousness. It was never about freedom to be your own God. It was about government protecting the rights of the people so they could serve God in freedom. That's what was the mindset establishing this country. And it was John Jay who said, we are a Christian country. Well, yes, you can have other faiths live among you, but the principles of the documents that govern you were taken from the Old Testament. And it's the progressive influences that were more, I would say, steered by corporate thinking, like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. They were successful in getting our culture to abandon that Christian worldview. And I can tell you, for example, Carnegie was the one that donated money in Pittsburgh for museums to be built, but the condition was that they would be open on Sunday, which, okay, so he was already eroding the Christian culture. I'm sure you remember, because I remember when businesses and government facilities were closed on Sunday. But they have been, and of course now we have several generations later, people who don't remember that.
They don't.
You had to buy your gas on Saturday because the gas stations were closed on Sunday. And that was all unofficial Christian culture operating to say, you belong in church. This is time for you to worship God. So, and Chick-fil-A still had that value. Hobby Lobby still has that value. And it's not because they're old. It's because they've maintained that tradition of informal self-regulation to honor God on his holy day.
And I think they're doing okay business-wise, aren't they?
Yeah, Chick-fil-A has been compromised by some of its leadership now. But the Green family that's still is the private owner of Hobby Lobby, they still are doing very well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so, hey, let's go back to kind of let people know. Obviously, you're very educated. I listen to you, and I always learn something. So tell the audience about your educational background. How did you get started? Where you to get to where you are today, and what you're doing today? Let's kind of go backwards and kind of talk about what you studied in school, what you did for a while, different things like that, and then what you're doing today.
Yeah, the essential people in my life who taught me to value education were my parents, who were parented by people who never finished their elementary level education. Okay, so it was World War I, between World War I and World War II. My grandparents were living in a coal mining area of Pennsylvania. And in particular, my mother's father was 9 years old when he had to leave school, elementary education, to become a breaker boy in the coal mines because his father had been crushed in the mines by a beam that failed. His body was pulled out from the mine and left on the front porch. They lived in company housing. That's how I see all of this social welfare is modeled after company housing, where the company takes care of every aspect of your life, but what it actually means is company control over every aspect in your life. If my grandfather did not leave school to do that job for the company, they would have been thrown out of company housing. You had to have somebody in the company to stay in that house. So he did that. And then he became a fireman. That was his, he became involved in politics, but not as an elected official, just basically as an influencer. He was an entrepreneur and owned a restaurant, but my mother advocated to get a college education. Her older brother said, "You don't need that, you're just a woman." That did not set well with my mother.
No.
And my grandfather, bless his heart, said, "Yes, if that's what you want, I'll pay for that." So my mom was a home economics teacher, and that's where I got this. I think it's not just a cultural influence in my house growing up, but I believe God gave me, through her, the gifts that I have as a teacher. And my father, his father left elementary school because his father died. That was one of the things they had in common, was they had both lost, my grandparents had both lost their parents at an early age. So my father's father became the maintenance man of the properties his mother owned. And when he was growing up, he had to work. My father had to work. But my grandfather's, his father's message was always, get an education, get an education, get an education. That will get you out of here. They were in basically, it was the Polish ghetto in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And it's not that they were not, it's not that they were ignorant people. They were very smart, but they didn't have the diploma.
Right, right.
So that was a big deal for my dad to get the education. And together, they married, raised a family of 6 kids, and that was always the messaging. There was never any message any of the 6 of us received that it was okay not to get an education.
Right.
We would be going to college. That's what was coming on. My dad was the human resource developer of manuals for professional education in his company.
Wow.
So in a way, he was a teacher too. And I would say, in fact, it was my conversations with my father, his respect for my mind, where he treated me as a real conversationalist, not as a child who wouldn't understand. But he knew all along he was trying to give me the business management skills he had. And I coupled that with my mother's teaching skills. But I will tell you, probably one of the factors that also played into that family influence was the fact there was no U.S. Department of Education while I was coming up through school. I had an excellent public school education that was based on classical curriculum. And it wasn't until the U.S. Department of Education came into being in 1980 that things really went south for public education. The civil rights aspects of ensuring that everyone had an opportunity for public education could have been done without the Department of Ed. It could have been done through a Department of Justice. Okay, but that wasn't the real, I would say, primary goal of the U.S. Department of Ed. The primary goal was the nationalization of education. And the reason I know that is because I studied the platform Nelson Rockefeller had written for him under the direction of people at the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation. And the one who wrote his education platform was John Gardner from the Carnegie Foundation of New York. Okay, so here you have these corporate foundations. John Gardner became President Johnson's Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, just assumed. At the same time, he was still the president of the Carnegie Foundation of New York. The problem we have here is that there was a very aggressive campaign by the conservatives in the Republican Party, led by Barry Goldwater, to prevent Nelson Rockefeller from being successfully nominated as the Republican candidate for president. Goldwater was successful, but what happened then was the Rockefellers, Goldwater beat Nelson Rockefeller as the candidate, but then Johnson beat Goldwater. So Nelson Rockefeller, not to be stopped, just maneuvered around Goldwater by making or lobbying for John Gardner to be the guy who wrote his platform, which wanted nationalization of education. He worked around Barry Goldwater and got Johnson to make John Gardner his Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. So you see, it's not about party. It's about having the position and influence at a level of government, regardless if it's Democrat or Republican, to get this globalist agenda in place. It was the Rockefellers that bought the land in Manhattan and donated it to the city of New York to donate to the UN, where the UN now sits, because the Rockefellers wanted to make Manhattan the world capital. And with all of that money, they were positioned to get all of this done. So my point is, the education system we have now was envisioned by the Rockefellers back in 1964 is when that platform was written.
Hey, Mary, let me ask you a question. So if you had a crystal ball,
Yeah.
and what do you think over the next 4 years with President Trump and his administration with the national education system that we have? And I agree with everything that you're saying. So do you think that we have an opportunity, because I'm thinking about the state of Missouri. When I was a state rep, the first 4 years between 12 and 16, I served on the, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I served on the elementary and secondary education budget board. So 2 committees.
I probably waved at you.
Yeah, and so for 4 years, I kept watching these Department of Education DESE people coming down, and they all wore black suits and black ties, white shirts.
They were probably attorneys.
They all dressed the same, and so like in a committee meeting, it might take like 8 or 9 of them to sit on that front row, and only 1 or 2 would actually present something. But I thought, what's everybody else doing here? I mean, don't you have anything else better to do? But they always controlled everything. And I'm going way back when I was on the school board at Ozark for 2 terms, I'd already made me a list of things that I wanted to change in public education. And so did a friend of mine who joined me on the school board at the same time. So the 2 of us, both business people, had decided, we had our kids in school, we decided, well, I think there's better ways to do education for our kids.
Yes.
Well, every time we said something the first few months, the superintendent would say, no, that's a good idea. That sounds like a good thing, but we can't do that.
Patting you on the head.
Because we can't do
Yes.
that
Thank you
because
very much.
we will lose our federal money.
Yes, exactly.
So we can't make our school system better in our own little towns that we know the best. And so do you think there'll be some major changes in the way?
Let me tell you one thing the board could have done, and that is fired the superintendent. Okay? Because what the superintendent is doing is telling you there are a financial resource from the federal government, which is not more than 10% of the state's education budget, is the tail wagging the dog. And because we don't want to jeopardize less than 10% of our budget, we're going to flip our entire education system to align with and this is why I was telling you the story about the Rockefellers, what the educrats in Washington, D.C. want. Because the Rockefellers didn't stop with just setting up the UN and with getting someone like John Gardner into an administration. It wasn't just Johnson. The Bushes both had that influence of, as a matter of fact, it was David Rockefeller that set up the Trilateral Commission, and in his initial invitation list of members he wanted in there, 3 in particular were Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, okay? So when you look at the education policy that Rockefeller wanted to nationalize education and transform it into workforce development, they've been very successful because regardless of party, they had a president whose education agenda was aligned to the Rockefeller agenda for this workforce development at a global level that would diminish American identity and sovereignty and prepare students not for self-governance, which is the original intent. And I know that because I have read Thomas Jefferson's bills for legislation on what was the intention of education. And Democrats would be surprised to know how very Republican he sounded.
Yeah.
The point is that they didn't stop infiltrating the federal government when they got the UN in place to influence our policies. See, as long as we are members of UNESCO, the U.S. has agreed to implement UNESCO policies. And that's where you get this, do you remember singing American-themed songs when you were in elementary school? They're not singing them anymore, right? Because now we're cultivating global citizens. And that was very subtly maneuvered. This curriculum change was very subtly maneuvered by, actually it was in the Bush administration, saying that we needed to get on board. Reagan took us out of UNESCO, and it was the second George Bush that it was the second George Bush that put us back in. It wasn't
And maybe
his
we'll
father.
get back out again sometime.
Listen, the whole UN and UNESCO have to go.
Yeah.
And my understanding is, because I've watched the Veritas videos, and you know how they are very clandestine in getting video recordings of officials. There's one video they have interviewing a UN official saying, yeah, we're scared if Trump gets elected because a substantial amount of our budget, like 30%, comes from the U.S.
Well,
And then the problem is a larger percentage comes from China.
Yeah.
So that's who's driving the UN, and that's whose policies we're getting.
Right, right.
Okay.
Hey, so we got to spend time, just a little bit of time for our sponsors, and then we'll get back and kind of finalize who you really are. So I tell you what, we got 2 great sponsors. Brad Pistow is a certified fiduciary financial planner located in Ozark, Missouri, and I use him for all my retirement planning. So does several of my family members, several of my business friends, different people that I know. He is one of the best in the United States, not just in Missouri or Ozark, Missouri. And if you want to know more about Brad Pistow and you're thinking about retiring and it's never too early to think about it, please call 417-581-9222, 417-581-9222. You'll get a free book called Safe Money Matters, or you'll get a book called Bulletproof. He doesn't charge to talk to you, and he is licensed, I think, in 12 different states, but he has associates in all 50 states, and so he definitely can help you. He's a contributor to many different things like Wall Street, USA Today, different types of publications. He's just an expert on retirement planning. And so I would highly recommend him. Let him know that Changing Times recommends him, and you won't be disappointed. He will help you save money and make money, and you'll never run out of money before you run out of your life. That's what he always says, and I do actually really believe that. The other sponsor we have is Springfield Nissan, Springfield Kia. That's John Whittaker. Also, Aaron Swanson. Aaron Swanson came in. He is the acting manager for the car dealer, and talked to Mary and I. We had a great interview with him, and we like to get our sponsors to come in. Hopefully, maybe one more time this year we get them in there because they're the experts in their own industry. And so Springfield Nissan and Kia are located on South Campbell in Springfield, Missouri. New cars on one side of South Campbell, used cars on the other. They specialize in cars that are certified cars, that are cars that have gone through more inspections, that cost a little bit more, but a lot of peace of mind about buying a kind of car like that. We know cars are a major investment for people.
Next to your house.
Oh, yeah.
Second major investment.
Oh, yeah, and I tell you what, I've bought my last two cars from these guys, John Whittaker and John Youngblood, the original owner. Bought cars from them. I'll continue to buy cars from them. I highly recommend them. Be sure and let them know that Changing Time recommends them. Their phone number is 417-882-3838. 882-3838. 417. So, okay, so we're going to run out of time. I knew we would, but we always do. But so you start out with a bachelor's degree in what? And then a master's?
Speech, well, it says communications, but I went into my undergrad degree for speech pathology, and it was a teacher in my high school. Well, actually, it was the wife of a teacher in my high school. I did speech and debate in high school. And so the debate coach's wife always accompanied us as a chaperone. She was a speech pathologist. And it was through her influence that I investigated speech pathology because I knew I wanted to do something to improve people's lives. This was associated with education. And I ended up applying for speech pathology. But I went through college in 3 years, basically because I did not like college. And I thought there's only one way out of this, and that's to go through it. But so I did it on a fast track. And by the time I was ready for the semester of internship, they were going to send me to a big urban city, and I had been a small town girl to do my internship, and I said, I can't go. I don't have the skills to negotiate danger up there. I'd be by myself knowing nobody. Let's have a plan B. And so it cost me this grandfathering into speech pathology because that was the year they changed the requirements from undergrad to master's degree. But I did it. I said, I can't go to this big city. Change me to an institution for the deaf, and I'll do my internship there. That ended up being St. Rita's School for the Deaf in Cincinnati. But I had to change my degree program from speech pathology to communications to do that. While I was working all of that out, a speaker came to one of my courses from The Ohio State University. She was on faculty there for the program for teaching students who were deaf and hard of hearing. And she said, I have scholarship money available for people who want a master's. And so because my internship was in a school for the deaf and she was offering a master's in deafness, I took it. And so my master's was paid for. I was on a national defense loan, and for every year I taught as a teacher of the deaf, the payments on that loan was canceled. So after teaching 5 years, that loan was canceled. And I really did not have ambitions for getting a doctorate. I was really a family type person. I thought it'd be great to get married and have a family. But God had other plans. In all honesty, it was a God thing. where I realized I wasn't in a social circle where I was going to be supported for advancing in education. I needed to get out of that. And lo and behold, I went to McGill University for a year, realized I wasn't going to stay in Canada, so I didn't want to learn Canadian law and administration. I applied to Columbia University they had a grant program for getting a doctorate in special education with a focus on deafness. And I go, thank you, God, I guess this is it. And I learned a lot from the women on faculty there that says you don't have to compromise your dreams for, family just because you're in higher education. And that was a big deal at the time because my father said to me, do you know what this will do to your chances of getting married? And I looked at him and I said, yeah, Dad, I thought about this. I don't want to marry a man who doesn't want to support my education. And he goes, okay. And so it wasn't a matter of having to choose. It was a matter of waiting for the right person. Mm-hmm. And I bless God because I did meet my husband, who was the right person, in the airport in Denver while I was interviewing for a job I never applied for, right? They flew me out to Denver for this interview, and I met him because Texaco was having their annual meeting in Denver, and we were on the same flight home. So God has his ways. I've really learned not to fret. There are times when I get impatient with his ways because I would have done things sooner. But I learned that he knows what's best, and he loves me to do what's best for me. I just have to be in his will. So what happened after that was, I was teaching in higher ed. Tom and I did have Mary Catherine, and I thought, this is great. God has given me and equipped me with everything I need to do what I enjoy, and that was a wonderful thing. And then this whole Common Core thing started up, and I go, hang on, this is not giving kids the opportunity I had to. What Jefferson intended was for everybody to get classical education because that was the education of the elite in Europe. And if we were going to be equal to any elite, we needed to have exposure to the same curriculum they had. It couldn't be classical education versus manual education, which is what they had in Europe for feudalism, which is what we have now. Because now, our K-12 education is more for workforce development than it is for saving the republic through education of citizens who know how to govern themselves and engage in government. Do you see what's going on here?
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So that's why I go back to Jefferson. I know his vision, and it was compromised by the Rockefellers and Carnegies who wanted handication instead of headication. And that's a direct quote from Carnegie. There's handication, manual labor, versus headication. What Jefferson had intended was that regardless of the social economic level of children coming up through school, public school would be paid for so that everyone had that same classical education. They could learn to govern themselves. They would know the great ideas of history and governance to judge whether a candidate for election was worthy of being elected. That was the point. And you can't do that if all you're reading is technical manuals on how a refrigerator works. And that's what they intended with Common Core. Technical education, not classical education.
And Mary, we still got Common Core going on,
You
right?
do, regardless of what the department tells you.
It's changed the name. I know
That's
you
correct.
did such a great job up in Missouri at the State House when I was serving. And we slowed it down, and they kind of stopped, and then they
Slow-walked it,
and then they kind of changed its name and stuff like that. We have some schools in Missouri that do probably more Common Core than others.
Here's the deal. If you open that laptop and your kids are learning from software, check the manufacturing website, the website of the manufacturers of that software, because everyone I've looked at says Common Core aligned. That's what matters.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter
And
what
so-
they're telling you at the State Department. What matters is what's put in front of your child in the classroom. And it's software aligned to Common Core.
Well, we hope, Mary, that we have 4 years, starting in January, that we hope that our president and Congress will all work together, and that we will make some major changes to
Well, they
change
just
the direction. So we'll
Trump
see.
just announced his nominee or a potential candidate for education, and it's not an educator. It's a woman who was on a state board of ed in Connecticut. Her name is Linda McMahon, and she's committed to charter schools and school choice. And I get that, but I think there's going to be a major stumbling block in not having a person who is deeply steeped in education and knows the issues. So we'll see how that all pans
Yeah,
out.
we'll see. I mean, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. But I really think this is, I hope we don't blow it. Hope we don't blow it. It's
This
kinda
is a
like-
window of opportunity that God has blessed us with.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of
Yes.
like up in Jersey City. We had the Republican governor, we had the House and the Senate supermajority, and we still couldn't do all the right things.
That's right.
And so shame on us. Now we'll see what happens with the federal government.
It's going to be, and here's the deal. As long as Christians sit out the election process, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Mary? We have run out of time, but I'm going to ask you another very important question.
Okay.
What's your favorite food? What do you like to eat the most?
I say pizza, but in all honesty, I would say my favorite meal is Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, you know what? Thanksgiving dinner, you can't beat that. And happy Thanksgiving. We'll be back next Wednesday, but the day before Thanksgiving. But just have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Mary, you are an amazing lady. You are a difference maker. You certainly are. And so I have always enjoyed visiting with you and talking to you. I learn so much every time.
And I appreciate your company and the opportunities you send my way.
Well, I tell you what, and someday I'll tell you, when I was growing up in elementary school, I had to go to a speech therapist because they said I couldn't pronounce the words. They even clipped my tongue.
Oh, did
You
they?
know that?
Yeah,
Did
yeah,
you know
yeah.
that was a therapy back then?
Yeah.
Did you ever have that?
Yeah,
so
we knew
so
about it.
somebody recommended that. So anyway, so I had my tongue clipped, and even when I was growing up, even my kids, I'd say a word a little bit differently, and they would make fun of the way I said things. I said, well, look where I am. People have to listen to me. They may not want to, but in the positions I'm in, they have to listen to me. And so I've gone from not being able to speak very well to not like you.
You know
not
what Mark
like you,
Twain said. He
not
said,
like
the
you."
older I get, the smarter my dad gets.
Oh, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, everybody have a great weekend. We'll be back next Wednesday.
All right. God bless.